Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation and its Institute for Diplomacy and International Relations, I would like to extend my warm welcome to you all, especially to our guest of honor, former Minister George Yao. His Excellency Sokchendas Sopir has long looked forward to this event. However, his mission to Beijing prevents him from being here with us today. However, he sent his best regards and wishes. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, from the end of World War II to the beginning of this century, the world system was under the domination of Western powers, namely the United States. As victors of World War II, the United States and its allies established a liberal international order to promote capitalism and Western values, free market economics, human rights, and democracy. The Western-led world order is anchored around key multilateral institutions established under the Bretton Woods system. The Bretton Woods system's ideational and economic influences were extensive. By early 1990s, the world capitalist system incorporated even former communist economies like Russia, China, and Vietnam. It was an era of neoliberal euphoria. Francis Fukuyama famously coined, or now the phrase became a label that people use to criticize him, and that is the phrase, the end of history. The core argument is that world history, particularly the 19th and 20th centuries, evolved around the struggle among ideologies. The first half of the 20th century saw the struggle between fascism and liberal democracy. The second half, communism and liberal democracy. Toward the end of the 20th century, the world witnessed the preeminence of liberal democracy. As world history evolved around the struggle between ideologies, the defeat of rival ideologies to liberal democracy and a free market economy means the end of history. It should be noted that Western hegemony was once so hegemonic that people in many circles resigned and appeared to accept that there is no alternative. The fact is that history did not end as we know it. If it did, we will not be here to discuss global and regional challenges. Since the end of the Cold War, the world has witnessed the unprecedented rise of China and other emerging economies. China's rise has attracted worldwide attention. Indeed, it has shocked the world and particularly worried some countries in the Western world. Many Western scholars and policymakers developed a fearful perceptions of China's rise. In their view, a rising power with the capability and the intention to transform the existing world order threatens the status quo. For China's part, it has firmly and publicly stated that its initiative, including the BRI, are to better the world community. Russia has also revived its power since Vladimir Putin came to power in 2000. And although European Union remained a close ally of the US, it has fought an independent role in global affairs. In short, the world has entered an era of multipolarity. Competition among these multiple poles of power has pressured countries and regional organizations. The question for us here today is, what are the implications for ASEAN within this context? It is fitting and fortunate that we have former Minister George Yeo with us today to help us understand this complex and rapidly evolving developments with his presentation titled Maintaining ASEAN Balance in the Transition to a Multipolar World. The presentation assesses the rapidly changing world wherein Southeast Asia occupies a geostrategic position and ASEAN plays a pivotal role. The presentation argues that the world is becoming multipolar despite US and Western resistance. It is great. In this great transition, the presentation further contends that ASEAN must adapt and adjust to changing pressures from different directions. It further elucidates that ASEAN unity is essential for member countries and crucial for regional peace and stability. Former Minister Yeo has an impressive resume that needs little introduction, especially in this part of our world. He is a visiting scholar at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy of the National University of Singapore and a founding patrons of its Asia Competitiveness Institute. Former Minister Yeo has held senior positions in both public and private sectors. He has and is currently serving as advisors or members of board of trustees of companies, some listed on NASDAQ, Singapore, and Hong Kong Stocks Exchange. Most noticeably, he served 23 years from 1988 to 2011 in Singapore government as Minister of Information and Arts, Minister of Trade and Industry, and of course, Minister for Foreign Affairs. Former Minister Yeo has recently published 3 books. They are available here in Cambodia at Monument Books. And it should be noted that, if I may, the proceeds from his book, from selling his books, will go to the charitable organization that his family created. So, in my conversation with Minister Yeo, he would like to turn this event into a dialogue. And therefore, the presentation might not be as long as you might anticipate, but rather they want to engage and also turn this into a learning event that share views between the speaker and the audience. And I can assure you that you probably can direct all kinds of questions to Minister, from economic to arts to foreign policies. And so please welcome our guest of honor.
I'm so honored to be here today to address you. It's been some years since I've been in Cambodia, and I took the opportunity when Foreign Minister Sokchenda invited me to come, to agree quickly and enthusiastically to see the country for myself, to see its progress, and to join you in celebrating its many achievements. It was not very long ago when the country was torn apart, when in fact all of Southeast Asia was torn apart by a titanic struggle between the US on the one side and the Soviet Union on the other. We're all caught up in it. In the early 60s, when Singapore was joining Malaysia and had trouble in Malaysia and left, Lee Kuan Yew had a good friend in Peng Sihanouk and considered even a government in exile in Cambodia. That would have been in the early 60s. to the mid-60s. Perhaps not such a very long time ago. When South Vietnam fell to the north in 1975, and Cambodia to the Khmer Rouge, there were alarm bells in Singapore about falling dominoes. I was on scholarship at the time as an armed forces scholar. And we were told by Defense Minister Goh Keng Swee to be on the alert and to be prepared for problems. And some of my seniors had briefings in London, in the US, about the communist threat. The war was horrible in Indochina. The Mekong was a great dividing line between those two worlds. I remember years later when I went to Luang Prabang and climbed the hill overlooking the city. At the top, there were anti-aircraft machine guns rusting away, pointing at Thailand. Because it was from Thailand and the Philippines that the B-52s came to bomb Indochina. And when I went through a foreign minister, Laos, with other foreign ministers to talk about connectivity, we were reminded that more bombs fell on Laos than on all of Europe during the Second World War. So it was a terrible period. When I became trade minister in 1999, one of the first countries I visited and led a trade delegation to was Cambodia. Tam Prasit was my host. We called on Prime Minister Hun Sen. After that, we went to Siem Reap. Before arriving at Angkor Wat, I remember Prasit telling me, he says, well, this was where a rocket almost killed Prime Minister Hun Sen. At that time, Phnom Penh was still full of weapons. And I heard horror stories from my colleagues who were operating here. One of them, a woman, I heard this not directly, but secondhand. She was a human resource manager in a hotel. And there was an employee who had a grievance. So he went up to her with a hand grenade in his hand, on the pin, and started talking to her. It was quite a way of negotiating a grievance. So she spent time calming him down, persuading him to put a pin back into the hand grenade, and finally resolving the grievance. Pascal told us this story, how he was at a dinner. There was a power blackout. And when the lights came on again, everyone had guns. He said that this was not a place for him. And I think it was a long time before he came back to Cambodia. So when people look at Cambodia as a snapshot and say, oh, well, no, it's imperfect, they forget what it was like a few years earlier, a few decades earlier. And to come back to Cambodia today, to see the changes in Siem Reap and in Phnom Penh, one is almost in disbelief that society could heal so quickly. Peace is precious, and peace must never be taken for granted. Yes, we are fortunate in that the geopolitical forces have turned away from us. The conflicts have turned away from us. And I think there's a fair chance that we can achieve another generation of peace in our region. The big conflict, the big geopolitical conflict is between the US and China, that we all know. And for a time, it looked as if the American crosshairs were on China. Not that China threatened the US in in the sense of wanting to invade the US, but China threatens US dominance, which we are all used to in the world. Secretary Ong Kiang talked about the Bretton Woods institutions. And for a long time, we lived under an American peace, within which we could travel freely, trade was depoliticized, intellectual exchanges were depoliticized. That was the world which enabled many of us to be educated in the US. And the US shared freely because that which it shared produced fruits, which in the end also redounded to the benefit of the US. But it is changing. And the US now, the US has now politicized the institutions it has created, like the WTO, like the IMF, because it feels now that those institutions are not always acting in American interest. But perhaps this has to be because the period of US dominance after the Second World War, when it accounted for 40% of global GDP, was unnatural. And then this cannot continue forever. All the old civilizations of Asia, they could not be kept down. And one by one, they gradually re-emerged. So the US could not have its way on the Korean Peninsula, fighting the North to a standstill. And the peninsula is still divided today. It did not prevail in Indochina. And over Taiwan, increasingly, it knows that if there's conflict with China over Taiwan, it cannot be assured of victory. So the Western tide, which has dominated our lives for so many generations, has crested. And we are seeing the return of all societies, all civilizations to the global stage. To me, it's inevitable that China will again reclaim its position as the biggest economy, the biggest market on earth. Not by conquest, but because it is a homogeneous population. China is 1.4 billion people. Over 90% are Han people, with one literature, one language, one set of heroes. Nowhere else in the world is there such homogeneity. So when China enjoys peace, its economy is always the biggest in the world. Its cost of production, because of minute division of labor, always the lowest. All over the world, all the way to Europe, you see remains of Chinese pottery. Because every time the country was organized, it could produce more cheaply than anybody else manufactured products. And we are seeing it again today. But if you go to Chinese museums, what is in those museums are Chinese artifacts. If you go to European museums, what you see in those museums are things taken from other countries, like Khmer statues. In the last few years, China has built thousands of museums, all of them containing Chinese artifacts. You won't find Khmer Buddha heads, you won't find Western artifacts, Indian artifacts in Chinese museums. Because it's always been a self-sufficient universe. I don't think the US understands this, or maybe it doesn't want to understand it. So it sees the rest of China as a mortal threat. If China were like the Soviet Union, wanting to turn other people into Chinese, like the Soviet Union wanting to turn others into communists, then a titanic clash between the US and China will be as inevitable as the one between the US and the Soviet Union. But I think China has a very different nature. And here in Cambodia, in its long history, its relationship with China was always one of mutual respect and dignity. In fact, for Cambodia, a lot of the history of Angkor has to rely on Chinese records. Chinese records discovered by the French and translated into other languages. Not Chinese records which are researched today between Cambodia and China about the history of the interaction. Because there's much more that has not yet been recovered for this country. However, we had to live through a period when this struggle between China and the West will persist. It takes time for people to accept that re-emerging China is not a threat to them. Yes, it may be a threat economically. Yes, it may be a threat to certain companies, but not a threat in the military and strategic sense. I don't think China has a wish to dominate the world. If it had such a wish, why would it be building all those great walls which every Chinese dynasty would do? Those of us who have been to the Great Wall, to see it stretching from horizon to horizon, sometimes over almost vertical hill mountain slopes. The amount of effort needed to build the walls and to maintain it as a nervous system to monitor the possibility of invasion, like an immunological system. Why did he do that? Because I was always afraid of the world outside. The civilization is very defensive in its mentality because they can govern Chinese people. They find it very difficult to govern non-Chinese people. So during COVID, they created a biological wall. The Westerners who were living in China couldn't take it. They left. The Chinese people who were inside, they complained, but they complied. Because it's in the history, they know that you comply, whatever the difficulty, there will be peace, there will be normality, and it's good for everybody. So if you're locked down, the rest of the country has a responsibility to help you. When it is the turn of somebody else to be locked down, the rest of the country will help that new city. So during COVID, every city in Wuhan, and the whole Wuhan was locked down, every city had a province to back it up. Every city had a province to back it up. When you have such a country, you enjoy a good insurance, which no one else enjoys. And that's the reason why the Chinese mentality is to preserve, protect an internal universe. We're wishing for more Chinese tourists to come back to Cambodia. They're not yet coming back. They're not sure why. Maybe because they want the money to be spent inside. Maybe they do not want to suddenly open the gates and cause trouble to other countries. We don't know, because they have their own reasons for doing all these things. All these things show a certain mentality. A mentality which is not easy to change, which is not easy for Westerners to understand. In Southeast Asia, we have seen China through many rise and falls. So there's an instinctual understanding of China. The China is too big to be made an enemy of, but it's also too big to get too close to. So manage that relationship. Get benefits from it, but protect yourself. And throughout Southeast Asia, That is the instinct. In Cambodia, in Laos, in Vietnam, in Singapore, Indonesia, throughout Southeast Asia. Some are a bit more pro-China, some are a bit more pro-US like Singapore, but by and large, no one in Southeast Asia wants to take sides. When we took sides, like we did during the Cold War, it tore us apart. And terrible things happened, including year zero in Cambodia. So if we keep ASEAN united and do not allow ASEAN to be balkanized as it was in the past, not only will we protect ourselves, it will help to bring peace to the entire region. Today, it is only in ASEAN, at the ASEAN Regional Forum, where North Koreans, South Koreans, Japanese, Americans, Russians, Chinese sit around the same table. They may not want to talk to one another directly, but at least they're going to listen to each other, eat together, and be courteous to one another. Because this is the ASEAN way. So when last November we had the G20 meeting in Jakarta, it was very tense because of the Ukraine war. Jokowi, just by creating an ambiance, just by music and by dressing and by ritual, got everybody to smile, to be polite, to be courteous. And many good bilateral meetings took place in Jakarta. When Trump met Kim Jong-un, the first meeting was in Singapore. The second meeting was in Hanoi. To me, this is the magic of Southeast Asia. We know we are too small to threaten anybody. We have no capability to invade China or India or anybody else. They can invade us, but we can't invade them. We don't have ICBMs. We don't have nuclear weapons. We don't have all this fancy equipment. But we have good diplomacy. If you push us too hard, you find us leaning in other directions with your enemies. Then you will get the message. And when you let up, we will let up and find balance again. All of us in ASEAN do that. Even Vietnam, which is a complex relationship with China. Party to party, very intimate. Military to military, very proper. Foreign ministry to foreign ministry, sometimes they fight, sometimes they criticize each other, but never allowing the overall strategic relationship to get too bad. Because Vietnam knows, when you defeat China, well, maybe about the flankers. When you invade China, forget it. When China invade you, well, China will get a bloody nose. So, okay, we live and let live. Laos, now there's a fast train from Kunming to Vientiane. If Laos in China's pocket, Laos has a very close party-to-party relationship with Vietnam. They fought together. They died together. Laos will never abandon Vietnam. But of course, if China brings benefits, then naturally Laos is also close to China, but never at the expense of Vietnam. So all of us, in our relationships, not only do we want balance, we take care never to harm our neighbors. They may not be happy sometimes, but never harm them, because if you harm them, they will have to harm us. Then the big powers will exploit our divisions, and we'll go back to the past. Certain recent events have also taken heat away from this part of the world. One is the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war, the Israel-Hamas conflict, for us, these are distant conflicts. We have our positions. We have our sympathies. But we are not directly involved. And we don't want to be directly involved. But because of these conflicts, the US and other Western powers have no bandwidth to make China an enemy. And these conflicts cannot be easily resolved. You take Ukraine. I don't think you can avoid now a situation like on the Korean Peninsula, where there's partition of Ukraine. There could be an armistice, there could be a ceasefire, but there'll be no peace agreement for decades to come. For decades to come. Because you can have a peace agreement which makes Russia the winner. Another thing, have a peace agreement acceptable to Russia if Russia is a loser. So there'll be a standoff. During the standoff, there'll be Western sanctions and pressures on Russia, which means Russia and China will still close together for a long time. They are not natural friends because they share a long border. And if you go to Heilongjiang, the museums there will tell you in the Treaty of Ivan, they ceded 600,000 square kilometers to the Tsar. All those cities, like Vladivostok, all had Chinese names. But okay, that's history. Today, China does not want Russia to lose. Because if Russia loses, then all the attention will be on China. But China doesn't want to support Russia 100% because then you lose friends in Europe. So China, 60-40, the weight, support Russia, sometimes 55-45, sometimes 60-40 again. But never 70-30, never 50-50. China triangulates very carefully. In the Middle East, is 70-30. The Israeli ambassador in the UN criticized China. The Chinese ambassador looked back and said, look, we are not your enemies. We believe that a two-state solution is the only solution which should bring peace and security to the Palestinians and to you. The ambassador kept quiet after that. But it's not 50-50. It's not even 60-40, it's 70-30. And China keeps relations with everybody, with Iran, with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, with the Gulf states, with Jordan, also with Israel. They know that with Israel, even though the Israelis want closer relations with China, the US will not allow it. Because the US is afraid that some of the technology which Israel has developed with US support may percolate into China. But Israel maintains the relationship with China because it knows that long term China will be important to Israel. When I went to Swat Hao 2 weeks ago, they told me that the Israeli ambassador, Israeli consul general, have been visiting Swat Hao. Why did they visit Swat Hao? Oh, where many Cambodian Jews come from. Because Lee Ka-shing's university, next to it, under the Lee Ka-shing, is a Guangdong Israel academic joint venture. And there are many Israeli professors teaching, doing research in China. It is the single most important intellectual cooperation project in China. So when I heard all these things from the Party Secretary of Santo City, I said, oh, this is Israel maintaining long-term options. Because Israel knows that today it has US backing. Without US backing, they can't do what they're doing now in Gaza. 10, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, the relative powers in the world will change. By 2050, McKinsey has been reporting every year, the biggest economy will be China. Number 2 will be India or the US. Number 4 will be Indonesia. Because of demographics, we have young populations in Southeast Asia. And every generation sees a leapfrog ahead. So Israel knows that the relative weights will change. And if it wants to secure its long term, it cannot just say, I will always depend on the US. Yes, the US will always be important. But looking at it 20, 30 years from now, the position will change. Various demographers predict that by 2050, not so long from now, 40% of babies in the world will be African. 50% will be Muslim. 50%. So it'll be a different kind of world. It'll be a multipolar world where China will be one pole, Russia will be a smaller pole, Europe will be one pole, India will be its own pole, the Middle East will have its own pole. The US, of course, will remain very important. Brazil, different part of Africa. This is the world we're entering, which is going to be very dynamic, complicated, different value systems, different political systems, different ways of doing things. And into that world, Southeast Asia, ASEAN, must find its place in the sun. I think we can survive quite well in that world because we are very heterogeneous in Southeast Asia. We're very diverse. We're probably the most diverse region in the world in terms of religion, history, political systems, our genetic inheritance. So we are comfortable dealing with a messy world because Southeast Asia itself is messy. But we must not allow this messiness to break us apart. So we should be like the Cambodian sticky rice, You can bend it, you still stick together. Just not in a rigid way, like in the European Union, but in an instinctual way that, no. Even if in Indonesia, we are still small compared to China or India or Europe or Japan. Just protect ourselves. And it will be a different world. And if we do that, I think there's a good chance we can achieve another generation of peace. And with another generation of peace, societies in Southeast Asia will be completely transformed. Like here in Cambodia, you've entered political stability. It is not a static stability because the stability has to adjust to internal changes and external changes. But if you have another period of stability for another generation, Cambodia will be beyond recognition and something which better recalls its glorious past. Thank you.
Charles. Next, our distinguished participants may have questions. So if you have questions, please kindly raise your hand. Please, Excellency. Our team will bring the mic to you.
Thank you. I'm fascinated listening to you. You confirm that international relations is a product of history. And I look at history of Cambodia, ancient Cambodia and China for the last 15 years. As you mentioned rightly, there were many Chinese sources about the ancient history of Cambodia, particularly Funan, translated by the French scholar. But more recently, we have more access to the Chinese sources in English. And we know, for example, that our relationship is almost 2,000 years. In the 4th century, a Taoist Marcus came to Funan to develop alchemy with healers. In the 6th century, the king of Funan sent 2 Buddhist monks from Hapala and Nakashina to China to translate Buddhist Sanskrit texts in Chinese. A year later, the emperor sent Pumodaya Nati in Chinese to learn Holy medicine from Funan, and so on and on. I have suggested to a few friends of mine who teaches international relations at Harvard that in order for Washington to understand that foreign policy didn't turn out very well, so for the last 50 years, then they should revisit their international relations curriculum. So from our perspective, we try to create, to capture our narrative. Cambodia now is different from what happened 35 years ago because of history. I used to share with colleagues from the outside world that young Cambodians, particularly, went to the same school, same colleges, read the same books, read the same theory, but they have different interpretation of the facts. So this comment, I like to ask you, what would be the best strategy for Cambodia to try to teach those leaders that seem to ignore history of Asia in general? And when they come to tell me, you're so close to China, I'm sorry, you're close to China before you can move to North America, grab the whole continent, the indigenous in their reservation. We did that long before. It's impossible to cut that price. Thank you.
In 1999, I met Senior Minister Sokan, who was chairing the Apsara Trust. I think the Apsara Trust has responsibility not only for Cambodia, it's responsibility for a very important part of global civilization. And the recovery of history should not be a nationalistic exercise. Then you get a ridiculous situation like the conflict you had over PRV here, when in fact, the year of a civilization, everyone benefits from it. The French, during the period of the Enlightenment, they had a group of scholars called the encyclopedists, Voltaire, Descartes, and so on. And it was astonishing, the kind of scholarship that they had in Egypt, in Indochina. The deep interest in history, cultures, languages. The early Christian missionaries. I read early Jesuit accounts of Cambodia, of Laos. They were absolutely fascinating. I mean, they were subjective, but they're fascinating. And you read Moho and how he tried to find a way to China along the Mekong. All the scholarship is lost in the West. They're subjective. They have causes. They want to tell us what to do. Whereas their forefathers, they wanted to know why we are what we are. So I will work with serious people, with the French in particular, maybe with some of the people in Oxford and Cambridge and maybe OS. Certainly with the Chinese, because there's a lot of records there which not even been translated or interpreted. And just by bringing scholars together, they'll begin to realize that, hey, we haven't developed ourselves. Let's talk about Janavarman II. He was in Java. Yeah, all Cambodians know that. What was Java at that time? Very few Cambodians know that. You know Salindra. They talk about Vijaya, what is Indonesia. And what happened during the target? Because if you look at the archaeological sites in Java, like Pambanam, they're very similar to what you have here. And for 10 years, I was involved reviving Nalanda University, which was the world's first university, established in the 6th century, destroyed in the 12th by Afghan invaders. After it was established, before Cambridge. And Nalanda had contact because there were premier monks who went to Nalanda. And Excellency, you talked about how Funan can send monks to China. It was one wow. And we borrow, we loan to each other, and we all engage in the process. So just by scholarship, which I hope the Apsara class can help to promote, you can bring people together. Thailand, Indonesia, India, China, Vietnam. and people begin to say, yeah, we do share much civilizationally, and therefore when we look at our future, it does not make sense for us to look at our future purely in nationalistic terms. And it will help us address some of the current challenges which now afflict us, like climate change, like pollution, like clashes of religions and values.
Next prize present to Excellencies Soksipaner.
Thank you so much.
I have one economic question. The world is going crazy now. I mean, recently at APEC, we have President Biden and President Xi meeting. Some sort of like toning down the expectation a bit. But I am, of course, APEC, they had finally get the supply chain agreement, which lead me to my question on the decoupling, the economic decoupling between the US and its allies, and then China on the other side. How do you see the future? Will this de-risking, the decoupling, will it be close? I have a lot of concern with that because Cambodia, some people say we close to China, but the new government will make a lot of effort to reach out to the West. We made a lot of effort to sort of try to find our own space under the sun. But definitely decoupling will not be helpful for us. But I'd like to hear your view on that one.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I don't think decoupling to a certain degree, especially in technologies which have military uses, can be avoided. In most of human history, countries had secrets which they protected. I think China understands, because for centuries, China had three critical monopolies. One of paper, which was an amazing advantage China had over everybody else. One was in silk, which they kept a secret for many centuries also. And one in gunpowder, which was not completely a secret, but they had very advanced gunpowder making technology. So when the US tries to deny China certain chip technology, the Chinese will complain, but they understand, because they themselves have done the same thing and are probably doing the same things in areas where they have an advantage. The one issue which is very dangerous is Taiwan. Kissinger reminded us repeatedly that when he first met Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong, in all the discussions, they always came back to Taiwan. ASEAN must be very careful on Taiwan. I think on Taiwan, we should be unambiguous that there's a one China policy. We are not involved in that conflict. Our problem with China is the South China Sea. But I think we can find a way out and make it a smaller problem, not let it become a bigger problem. The Americans are encouraging the Filipinos to stand up to China over the Second Thomas Shoal, the OLST, which has been beached on one of the atolls. It's breaking down, but the Filipinos want to repair it. China doesn't allow the Filipinos to repair it, and so there's a standoff. But I was told by the Filipino ambassador in Singapore recently that when Marcos met Xi Jinping in San Francisco, they agreed that between the two countries, they will negotiate a code of conduct on behavior in the South China Sea, even before there's one between China and ASEAN. In order to keep this problem contained and let it flow out of control. If we play it right, this decoupling between China and the US, this trade tension, which sometimes gets worse, sometimes gets better, can benefit all of us in Southeast Asia. Because whether you're a Chinese company, Japanese company, European company, American company, you say it's too stressful to be investing in China. Maybe invest in Southeast Asia instead. So depending on what you need, agricultural base, technical skills, you could choose Vietnam or Cambodia. When I was in the private sector, I worked with Omniarity on the industrial park here, logistics park here in Phnom Penh, in order to encourage Chinese investments in Cambodia. So there's enough value added in Cambodia for exports to the US and Europe. So everybody in Southeast Asia to exploit this opportunity to get more investments. Can we replace China in manufacturing? No, it's not possible. During COVID, China sealed off the border, the land border with Vietnam. And many Vietnamese factories could not operate because they did not operate autonomously. They operated as part of a larger manufacturing system with China at its core. There's no way, however efficient we are in Southeast Asia, that in simple manufacturing or even in complex manufacturing, we can match China. But we have our other advantages. We are capital. We can produce durians. We have mango swamps. We can produce many more things than we can ever hope to produce. So if you go to the border crossing near Langsam, they have a main crossing, which is WTO rules. There are two great channels. Maritime products from Southeast Asia, one-way street to China. Fruits and vegetables, two-way street. Some to China, some from China. Because if you do not have these great channels, the smuggling cannot be contained, cannot be controlled. So when I was in logistics, I began to analyze all these things in finer detail. Between China and Southeast Asia, China is temperate, dry, aging. Southeast Asia is wet, powerful, young. There are so many areas of complementarity. We are resource rich in Southeast Asia. Yes, one example. On Friday, I'm going up to Shanghai. I've only one clothing with me. Shanghai is 5 degrees now. So I got to, 5 degrees is very cold for someone from the equator. So I'm kind of warm clothing. Many Chinese people, when they grow older, do not want to be in China in winter time. They want to come down to Southeast Asia, to Vietnam, to Cambodia, better still to be on the beach in Sihanouk View or in Indonesia. If you tell them, look, you can buy a house here and we look after it for you, you can spend 3 months here in winter time, many will come. The Americans, they went to Florida, then to the Caribbean, then Mexico. The Russians go to Turkey, go to the Gulf. The Europeans go to Ibiza, Mallorca, also to the Gulf. We can expect millions and millions of Chinese want to own homes and vacation when it's cold up there in Southeast Asia. We should be prepared for it. We need food, all kinds of food products from us. And durians are an exploding market in China. Right now, mostly Thai durians, no smell. So I see a whole shop full of durians, no smell. I say, oh, Thai durians. One day, some of them will enjoy Malaysian and Cambodian durians. And when I was in Swatang, suddenly they say, oh, this is a durian chicken soup. Chicken soup is an abomination. They said it, oh, it's actually quite good. The durians and the chicken reinforce each other. But the China market will create all kinds of new possibilities for us. And those entrepreneurs who are creative, they will find opportunities for Cambodia, for Thailand, for Malaysia. I was told in Malaysia, the investment pipeline is full. And that's partly because of US-China tension. So we can derive benefit from it, provided it doesn't lead to war, which I don't think it would, because right now the US has to concentrate on Europe and on the Middle East. And in 10 years from now, I don't think they can start a war with China.
Now, Cambodia is a country that has successfully gain peace, economic development. And now in one part of Southeast Asia, and that is Myanmar, that war is flaring up, and it could be, a potential conflicting issue for ASEAN. What is your advice on how to deal with the issue in Myanmar that will allow ASEAN, to maintain a unity and then balance, in a way that bring peace, and stability to the region?
It is a very sad country. It is also a very abundant country. So the distance from Victoria Point to Kachin was stretched from Mexico to Canada. It is a very big country. And it has everything from Himalayan slopes all the way to beautiful karst coastlines, high mountains, plains, dry zones, all kinds of minerals, hydrocarbon resources. They produce some of the best rice in the world. So why should that country be like this? It's because it is not a naturally united country. The Burma people are 50%. They have minority groups all over. So when Aung San drew up the constitution for the Union of Burma, I think they listed about 150 ethnic groups. Rohingya was not one of the 150. Bengalis were. So later on, when partly with support from outsiders, the Rohingya issue came to the fore. They were very angry. Even Aung San Suu Kyi doesn't accept the Western view because they remember the constitution which created the Union of Burma. But in Southeast Asia, the Muslim countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and to some extent Singapore, feel strongly about the Rohingya case. In the past, we have prepared to deal with the junta, with the military government, for many years. Now there is a more complex set of emotions about Myanmar. And when the recent coup took place, ASEAN took a different line from the lines in the past. In the past, the approach was very Southeast Asian. We smile, please come in, we shut the door, then we talk. Politely, but directly. I remember my time minister talking to Senior Minister Tan Shui. He told Tan Shui, you have a beautiful roadmap to democracy, very good. Unfortunately, something is missing. It's got no timeline. A year later, Tan Shui produced a timeline. And even when Seko Nagis in Myanmar, not long afterwards, they carried through a referendum on the new constitution. Of course, it was drafted by the military. But because of the British legacy, in Myanmar, they're very legalistic. And they still are very good lawyers. And when you have written communication in Myanmar, they check all the legal terms. So when in Singapore we deal with Myanmar, we find that on legal matters, they are closer to the British than Thailand or Cambodia or Vietnam. More similar to Malaysia and to Brunei. Aung San Suu Kyi is a tragic figure. Her strengths and her weaknesses are two sides of the same coin. Without that passion, that obduracy, that unyielding nature, character, she could not have restored democracy to Myanmar. Those same qualities prevented her from compromising with the military and causing them to lose face. I don't think they wanted the coup. They felt that if they didn't have a coup, they would lose face before their own people, and the country will come apart. So now we have a situation where everyone is part of the problem. Aung San Suu Kyi, the army, the ethnic groups. But everyone has to be a part of the solution. Everyone. You cannot say one side against the other. Which means that the process of reconciliation will take time. And ASEAN must create a peaceful environment, not a polarizing environment. I think it's wrong for ASEAN to take sides. ASEAN has to say, look, I know it was only a problem. We're all relatives and friends. We say good words about each other. Encourage them slowly reconcile and for wounds to heal. I think right now we grandstand a bit too much. I say that with some reluctance because I was former foreign minister. I do not know a lot of the details, and perhaps I'm ignorant of many important facts. But I think it's more important to keep them in and have a fierce argument inside the room than to keep them out and for us to be talking at each other. Because if we do that, what will happen? Myanmar will have to work closer with China, closer with Russia. India will never abandon Myanmar because if they abandon Myanmar, they are abandoning Myanmar to the Chinese. So they won't allow that. So if we do not find a way to bring them in, we are locking ourselves out. I think it's not in ASEAN's interest. In the whole, Myanmar is not so important that it can disrupt ASEAN. But it is a wound which, if we're not careful, can infect us.
I'm Ricky, president of Club of Cambodian Journalists. My question is about the, there have been many reports and repeated statements, particularly from the United States, about the Orion naval base in Sihanoukville. So based on your views, do you think that China, looking at the size geopolitically and the area itself, whether China has a good reason to invade, like, let's say, the military presence in Sihanoukville at the Orion base?
I don't think Cambodia would ever allow any foreign military base on its soil. To me, to think otherwise is to misunderstand the character of the Cambodian people. I think the Cambodian people are too strong, too dignified to ever think like that. But if you have a naval base and you open it to the Chinese and to the Americans and to the Singaporean Navy, that's okay. In Singapore, we offer facilities to the American Navy and Air Force. But if Chinese Navy ships want to call on our port, they're welcome. So to the Cambodian Navy. But the US is suspicious because they think that Cambodia will side China. And they point to previous events. I think they misunderstand Cambodia. And Cambodia should, without showing weakness, be very open, be very firm that these are our base. It's our decision to decide whom we welcome. But we are not offering any country, and certainly not to you, America, either, a base. And we're not offering China a base. So have a clear position, stick to it, be transparent, but never lose your sense of dignity and autonomy. Do not, when you meet the Chinese and they pressure you and you bend. Then when you meet the Americans, they pressure you and bend the other way. If you start doing that, no one will respect you. It's better to have one clear position which you are prepared to say identically to the Americans and the Chinese and everybody else. Then after a while, they may not be happy, but they say, yes, you have your own spine. Yeah.
Please, Miles, for the first row. Yeah.
Thank you, Excellency. For the first of all, I would like to introduce my names. My name is Hermenegildo Cupa Lopez. I'm come from the one of the small island neighboring of Australia and Indonesia, Timor-Leste. Excellency, you know Timor-Leste very well. The topic is very interesting, and I thank you for your meaningful and insightful. So Timor-Leste is, as your Excellency know very well, that we are one of the victims of the World War II. After the US was defeated in Vietnam, Saigon, then Timor-Leste was accused as one of another communism. Then US supported or the new order regime of Under Suharto, then invited our country. Well, and now we are part of the 11 member for ASEAN. So we long struggling almost 11 years after the under Cambodian chairmanship. Then the leaders of ASEAN had a consensus, admitted Timor-Leste as an 11 member of ASEAN, then the status as an observer. The recent ASEAN summit in Jakarta under Indonesian chairmanship, Timor-Leste received already packets of the roadmap. Of course, Excellency, very expert and about ASEAN, because long time as in the part of the joining the government of in Singapore. Any advice for Timor-Leste? When is the right time for Timor-Leste to be a full member of ASEAN? Of course, we are now as a teenager country. Of course, Timor-Leste, we developed the Timor-Leste only as a 21 years old. In terms of infrastructure, human resources, we need more capacity building, we need more luxury airports, we need more 5-star hotels in order when Timor-Leste become a full members. Of course, we will chair ASEAN and host it for dialogue partners and all our leader of ASEAN. So this is as I'm raised talking about this note as an ambassador, as my personal as a Timor-Leste. Then it's good for us to free to have a scientific discussion. If as an ambassador, maybe when I convey any wrong words, then capital will punish me or something. Thank you very much indeed, Excellency.
Thank you, Excellency, for being here and for asking me this question. For many years, Singapore did not support Timor-Leste joining ASEAN because we felt that ASEAN had enough problems, and if Timor-Leste joined too early, it may add to our burden and would not be good for Timor-Leste either. So I felt a bit guilty about taking that position as foreign minister. So I went down to Delhi to explain my position and to ensure that our bilateral relationship was further enhanced. And my argument was this. At that time, ASEAN had about 700 meetings a year. Timor-Leste had no capacity even for some basic functions like air traffic control. And if all the officials are there attending ASEAN meetings, who's looking after the country? And I believe since then, the capacity in East Timor has improved a lot. But there must be 1,000 ASEAN meetings a year. And if all your officials are attending ASEAN meetings, there are very few people left to look after the country. So the best approach for Timor-Leste is to take advantage of ASEAN, but take your time about becoming a full member of ASEAN, because you do not have enough people to spare. No, Lee Kuan Yew controlled tightly the number of embassies Singapore had. Until today, we don't have many embassies. You see, if you have somebody good enough to be ambassador, he should be at home running a ministry or a secretary board. So only the most important countries should have embassies. And today, we don't have an embassy in Canada. We don't have an embassy in Spain or Italy, and they're not happy. But we say, look, there are only 5 million people. But East Timor, if you're not careful, ASEAN will absorb all your energies and create a bad mentality among civil servants. Well, this is a way to have a holiday, to have a free travel, to get per diem and so on. You don't want that. You want a public service which is intensely concerned with your own development first. So only join the bits of ASEAN which are to your own advantage. The other things, no, it's okay. You say, I'm not coming. Yeah. You say, if you're a full member and you don't come, people will be angry with you. They say, no, I'm an associate member, I'm some second-tier member, and I can pick and choose. That is the best position to be in. Yeah. This is my view. No doubt, since my last visit to East Timor, I hear many things have changed. Ramos Horta invited me for his inauguration, but unfortunately, I had another event going on, and the flights were too difficult. But I believe, even though you have made much progress, you should concentrate on your own internal strength first, before becoming a full participant of ASEAN. Yeah. I think my foreign ministry may be angry with me, but never mind.
Right, thank you very much, His Excellency Foreign Minister. Yeah, I think it's a very good opportunity. So it's irresistible to not ask you any questions. And thank you for all your insights. I think it's very insightful to be here to listen to you about what the global view, regional view, and even at the country level, and your own experience in dealing with countries at the bilateral level. So it's very insightful in terms of me as a younger generation from Cambodia, and also this opportunity to thank host Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Eun Kim. Just to continue on your conversation, on your presentation about, ASEAN stickiness, sticky rice, right? So how do we do that, right? So I know in ASEAN, we have an entity, but we don't trade with each other a lot. We depend on more bigger countries, even in economy-wise. And I think there's a lot of effort trying to do that. And now with the world changing into a multipolar world, maybe it presents a new opportunity, right? So how would ASEAN take advantage of this and being, I think it's an interesting terminology to become a sticky rice, and then taking advantage of the multipolar world and maybe addressing challenges for all our members in ASEAN. Maybe each member is in different positions. You said it's very messy. We still have a lot of challenges to solve, but maybe the future opportunity where we can benefit can help us also solve our own internal challenge. Like if every country develop well, then I think we can discuss about more things that we could do rather than worrying about survival or worrying about our own different development. There could be opportunity to do something together, right? So how do we ensure that looking at this multipolar world, we could develop in a balanced way in ASEAN and become real sticky rice? I mean, in Cambodia, terminology is chopstick. We use a chopstick terminology. One chopstick can easily be broken, but a bunch of chopsticks is strong. Right? So how to become that, right? A bunch of chopstick or sticky rice. Thank you. I know they've been throwing a lot of questions at you, but I hope that. Thank you very much.
I feel increasingly that this is something organic. It's rooted in our own history and culture. that it's not because we want to be close together that we stick together. I believe that the nature of our rice is sticky. So naturally we stick to each other when there is no geopolitical forces dividing us apart. I noticed when I was in government at international meetings, let's say in London or New York, after a while we get tired of Western food. And in the evenings, we go to Asian restaurants and we end up meeting other ASEAN delegations in the same restaurants. Because all of us have the same taste, you know. If we don't have rice or noodles, after a few days, we are very unhappy. So we look for these things. And we like flavorful food. The Australian historian, Anthony Reid, once had this insight, which I thought very interesting. He said, Southeast Asia, in all of Southeast Asia, fermented shrimp in one form or another is used for flavoring food. Fermented shrimp and fermented small fish. And every dish we have versions of it. So you have the umami flavor, the yumminess of our food. And we like eating. In Southeast Asia, the moment you sit down, something appears before you, you know. And if you look at our culture and religion, we kind of share a lot in common. So you talk about Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat is not confined to Cambodia. Angkor Wat is not intelligible if you look at it purely in Cambodian terms. It is part of a much larger civilizational phenomenon. China has always been part of our history, it's part of our blood. You know, every Southeast Asian country, there is a tradition of intermarriage in Southeast Asia. And after decolonization, we went back to our natural self, which is we begin to turn to one another. Now, economically, not as much as we would have hoped, but much more than the past. So you look at Phnom Penh today, you see all Thai companies, Malaysian companies, Singapore companies, Vietnamese companies, they're all over Phnom Penh now. Maybe not as big as the multinationals, but they're all in. And it will continue. So I believe that this stickiness is not the result of policy, but the result of decolonization, going back to something more organic. But we should push for it through ASEAN in terms of economic liberalization, simplifying procedures, ease of entry, make it easier for ASEAN citizens to visit one another, more air connectivity. And when I was foreign minister, I tried to do two things, but I failed. One is to do a joint bid for the World Cup. I said, if each ASEAN country offers one stadium, we can organize a World Cup, right? And have an ASEAN team, a combined ASEAN team to represent us. But that has not gotten very far. Then the other which I pushed for was for us, all of us, to teach our children to sing the ASEAN anthem. It'd be nice if at an event like this, after the Cambodian anthem, we play the ASEAN anthem. And in Singapore too. So I tried to push it in Singapore, but I had very cool response from the education ministry. But I think we should not stop trying. We should get our young people to feel more Southeast Asian. And we catch them young and encourage them to travel to other parts of the regions. I think in another generation, ASEAN will be even stronger.
Good morning, sir. My name is Professor Jose Mora from American University here in Phnom Penh, and I'm very pleased to see you. Always glad to hear from Singaporeans and their very outspoken opinions, which is fascinating for all of us. I love sticky rice, and I love rice. That's not a problem. But unfortunately, I think the rice is not sticky enough. And it's bunching up in different little balls of rice, like a little pachumban that we have here. Different balls. And I understand that the issue of the South China Sea, in my very humble opinion, I think the whole discussion on the code of conduct is dead. It's stalled and it's not going to go anywhere.
That's just my humble observation. However, it seems that we are evolving into something that is the right of possession. Whatever you possess, you keep. And none shall pass beyond that spot. That is contrarian to what everybody wants to achieve, which is something according to UNCLOS. We are not going to observe UNCLOS. And that's just a fact that we're going to have to deal with. Now, the challenge is ASEAN has been unable for multiple reasons to reach any agreement in that, probably because mainland Southeast Asia versus archipelagic Southeast Asia are different in outlooks in this respect. But that is creating a little bit of a divide between members amongst the organization. It's not the only issue. There's other maritime issues, such as piracy, such as the Malacca Straits, where there have been unilateral approaches to resolving common problems in the region. But I believe that it should stay within ASEAN. But if ASEAN is unable or unwilling to take that, then can we really rely on ASEAN to resolve significant issues? Not economic issues. We're excellent at resolving economic issues, but high-level politics issues. So your opinion on that would be appreciated. Thank you.
The South China Sea is probably the single most important issue affecting relations between China and ASEAN. There are 4 claimant states, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Philippines. Malaysia and Brunei have their own understanding with China, which is why at ASEAN meetings, Malaysia and Brunei always, they don't talk very much. They leave others to do the talking. And my own assessment is that quietly, there's some understanding between them on fishermen, on drilling of oil. Vietnam has a complex relationship with China. And Vietnam occupies small islands in the Spanish and China. As I said earlier, it has a relationship which Vietnam knows has to be managed, and it's being managed. The Philippines is more complicated because when the Americans took over the Philippines from the Spanish, the British were afraid that the Americans may dominate the South China Sea because they're both naval powers. And the Americans made it clear that they had no claim to any island in the South China Sea. So in the Filipino birth certificate, there was no island in the South China Sea when they became independent. Later on, there was a claim to Calayan, but that was immediately contested by Taipei, which at the time claimed the South China Sea. UNCLOS is interesting. China was outmaneuvered in UNCLOS because China, when it acceded to UNCLOS, opted out from compulsory adjudication. So when the American lawyers on behalf of the Filipinos took the case to UNCLOS, China said, no, we are not subjecting ourselves to compulsory adjudication. Not realizing that the tribunal said, no, but first, in itself is justiciable, whether we can opt out. Because China said, nothing doing. I'm not going to get involved. They said, well, it's up to you. And since China was not involved, out of 5 judges, 2 to be appointed by China, 2 by Philippines, 1 by the president of UNCLOS. Since China did not appoint these 2, the president of UNCLOS, who's from Yana was an old Musho official, appointed 2 judges on behalf of China. So out of 5 judges, 3 appointed by Yanai, the other 2 by the Philippines. And since China was not there, it said, well, in that case, we create China's case based on open material. And then on that basis, they judged that China could not opt out from compulsory adjudication. So China protested. They said, well, it's okay, they're moving on to the Union Tribunal. Do you want to participate? China said no. They said, well, it's okay. So again, 5 judges were appointed, 3 by President of UNCLOS, 2 by the Philippines. Again, China's case was constructed on China's behalf. And surprise, surprise, Judge China to have no case. So this was what happened at UNCLOS. China was outmaneuvered because by refusing to take part in the case, it lost the case. If you had taken part, it might still have lost. It would have been trapped. So I told my friends in Hong Kong, you should have submitted amicus curiae on behalf of China and expose it. I read all 400 pages of the tribunal report. The key element in the report is that Taiping Island is not an island. Taiping Island is the size of a 18-hole golf course, about 40, 50 hectares. It produces 20 tons of fresh water a day. The tribunal decided it's not an island because China does not occupy 365 days a year. During the monsoons, they pull out. Therefore, it's not an island. If it's an island, it has an EEZ, and the Filipino claims collapses. So I'm going to a bit of detail because many of us just read the headlines and believe that China has no case. What I'm saying is it's more complicated than that. I'm not saying that Filipinos have no case. The Americans, up to the 60s, when they conducted surveys in the region, sought permission from Taipei. In fact, the 4 biggest islands in the Spratleys and Paracels occupied by the IOC with the support of the American Navy. So a US Navy ship called the USS Pacific, rechristened Taiping by the Taiwanese, by the ROC government, was the one which landed on Ituaba, and they called it Taiping Island. It was America denying those islands to Mao Zedong. You see. So my point is, when I was foreign minister, I studied all the claims in detail. Vietnam's claim, French claim, American claim, British claims. No one is going to give up its claims. China's claims had its origin to the Qing dynasty when the French came, and every step, the Qing dynasty in defense protested. One Jesuit priest planted a French flag on an island. It was not Paranalus. Those islands had been used by fishermen for centuries, right? Then the French annexed it not as part of Vietnam, but as part of France. I think in 1931 or something. See? But Vietnam says, look, there are this claim, that claim, there are all kinds of documents. And they had important witness in 1954 and 1957, San Van Dam, when they had a war with France and North America, it was only belonged to China. In 1975, they said, no, we withdraw our earlier position because they were made under the duress of war. The duress of war is a defense to be made when the other party is an enemy. No. If you go to ICJ, I do not know how the judges will decide. But it's best that these countries negotiate on the basis of good neighborliness. And the South China Sea is like the Mediterranean. It is a sea which unites us. It's not a sea which divides us. Southeast Asians went to China through the South China Sea. China went to the Indian Ocean through the South China Sea. Monks, traders, conquerors have been sailing up and down these waters. These waters should not divide us. They should unite us. And that should be ASEAN's position. And if we take that position with China, taking a practical approach on fishing rights and economic rights, I think we can manage this problem.
Good morning. My name is Bormai, a junior student from Institute for International Studies and Public Policy. So I want to ask you a question that has been discussed among the IO students itself. So given that ASEAN is very diverse, therefore the benefits and the interest that each ASEAN member state would receive is also different as well. Some may receive more from the US and some may receive more from China. Therefore, given this aspect, what can we do to ensure that ASEAN member state would prioritize the collective interest rather than its own national interest or benefits? Thank you.
On critical issues, ASEAN should try and coordinate a common position. When first the Japanese and then the Americans made the Indo-Pacific a new way of calling the Asia-Pacific because they wanted India in. many of us in Southeast Asia were worried that this was an anti-China maneuver. And ASEAN then issued its own view of what is the Indo-Pacific, which did not find favor with the Japanese or the Americans because it addressed what was the underlying motivation, which was to exclude China. We do not feel comfortable about excluding China. We are comfortable about including India, but we are not comfortable about excluding China. So on critical issues like on Quad, like on BRICS, I think it's good if ASEAN, after doing the retreats, talk about common ASEAN position. You take BRICS. Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand want to join BRICS. I think that Singapore should join BRICS, but we should stand behind Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand because we don't want Americans to misunderstand us. But it would be good if ASEAN has a view on BRICS and asked to join BRICS as a grouping and help to make BRICS an open, inclusive grouping and not an expression of a new Cold War. So in critical issues, if we in ASEAN do not have deep discussions in order to find common solutions, you are right, there is a danger that we can be divided, and that's not good.
Thank you, His Excellency, for the profound insight so far. Good morning. My name is Peter. I am a university student from the Institute for International Studies and Public Policies as well. And I have two questions for you. The first question is that you stressed the importance of ASEAN's unity, especially in this ever-evolving landscape towards multipolarity. So I would like your response to skepticism that ASEAN is becoming more disunited than ever due to the exacerbation of regional issues, whether it's the South China Sea or the Myanmar crisis, and ASEAN's inability to resolve those issues. The second question is something that I've given some thoughts to, and I've asked many people, but given your experience and insights working in foreign affairs, I would like your take on this as well. So assuming that ASEAN is disunited, do you see the what is the future outlook for the organization? And if I may be so bold, do you see the potential dissolution of the organization itself? Thank you.
We are often criticized by Western commentators for being indecisive, elliptical, avoiding difficult issues. In the Western world, when they have disagreement, they vote. And then they have a decision, they move on. And you meet another issue, you vote again. And then you decide what to do. So this is the Western European Western approach. I remember once when I was a minister in attendance to President Jacques Chirac, he said, well, I mean, I had been minister in attendance, but I was talking to him when it was in Singapore. He said, Europe lurches from crisis to crisis. And before every vote, there are intense lobbying, negotiations into the wee hours of the morning. It's very stressful being a European diplomat, and all the energies are absorbed internally within the union because they're negotiating among the neighbor countries all the time. You know, in ASEAN, we never vote. I mean, in the constitution, we can vote, but we never vote. Why don't we vote? Because if we vote, I win, you lose face, the next time you come after me. So what do we do when we can't achieve consensus? Well, we say, well, we let the senior officials discuss further, create an eminence persons group, create a council of wise men, and then a few months' time the report comes, and we discuss again. So when we meet an obstacle, we either go around it or we gradually erode it until we find a pathway through. Not only Timor. It took us years, but gradually, little by little, we achieve consensus by time. This is the ASEAN way. Is it weakening? I don't think it's weakening. I think it's not weakening because they're afraid that China will become very big, India will become very big, the Western powers are domineering. If we don't stick together, each of us on its own will have very little leverage. If Cambodia is on its own vis-a-vis the US or vis-a-vis China, it's very uncomfortable. But if we can hide behind ASEAN, well, that's different. I don't think Vietnam can have a normal relationship with China without ASEAN. So Vietnam needs ASEAN. Vietnam wants a strong ASEAN. And Indonesia, though big, it knows that it's small compared to the others. And therefore, it wants ASEAN to succeed. But the key is Indonesia. When I was Foreign Minister or Trade Minister, I knew that without Indonesian support, we cannot develop any major initiative. But we also have to impress upon the Indonesians that if they have a major initiative, they must also get Singapore involved. Otherwise, we will not be our friends against Indonesia. So we negotiate among ourselves. But our unity is not because we love one another, but because we are afraid that if we are divided, we'll be eaten up by bigger players. So in my book, I say ASEAN is united by fear, and that fear is not going away anytime soon. In the multipolar world, there'll be new fears.
Please be informed that we have about 15 minutes left, so we will take up like 3 more questions. Thank you.
I just want to add up his questions about the indecisive, ASEAN. My question is about the whether ASEAN is now lacking of like statesmen or strongmen. Let's say if we look at in the past, like Lee Kuan Yew, Mahathir, and until recently that the Prime Minister Hun Sen. But right now there's no one else. I mean the strong leader. So do you think that ASEAN is in the right directions, that still ASEAN is enough, or still need someone that's strong enough in order to be like a locomotive to drive ASEAN further and faster? Thank you.
Let me confine my answer to the issue of leadership, because I've talked about why I believe in ASEAN unity and why I have faith in this unity becoming even greater in the future because of a common fear of external forces impinging upon us. Leadership is sometimes the result of technology and circumstances. In the old days, you are an emperor. You create awe because you can kill people, you are up on a pedestal, you wear costumes, headgear, shiny armor. But today, microphones, cameras are ubiquitous. And if it's just theatrics, people say it's just theatrics. The emperor has no clothes, or behind all this clothing is just an ordinary human being. So the nature of leadership is changing everywhere. Not just in politics, it's changing in business, it's changing in families. If you as a university professor try to lord it over your students, you lose their respect. And you must expect them when you're talking to them that they'll be checking what you say online. They'll be using ChatGPT. And the kids may know ChatGPT better than the professors. But if you're as a professor, say, no, you must show me respect. You must listen to me. You will lose your students. So leadership is a chemistry between those in certain roles and others. And that chemistry has changed because of technology. So a leader today has to be effective by being genuine. I'm not perfect. If you think I'm perfect, I'm probably a fiction. So we no longer expect our leaders to be perfect. We don't expect them to be all singing and dancing. Now, in a crisis, do I trust him? Trust is important. And in ASEAN, the days of Lee Kuan Yew, Mahathir, I mean, that's past. I'm not sure if in today's age, Lee Kuan Yew and Mahathir can succeed. I remember Lee Kuan Yew's one of his last encounters with students. He tried to browbeat them. The students were not impressed. Because you cannot be a leader for all situations. A leader is a product of a specific period and a specific set of conditions. And in today's Cambodia, in today's Southeast Asia, we may need different kinds of leaders who are not giants or pretending to be giants, but those who are more subtle, at their operating units rather than hierarchies, networks rather than depending upon military regimentation. So yes, superficially, it appears as if we no longer have strong leaders. But is that really true? Look at industry, look at technology, look at the people who are taking charge in many areas. They're effective in their own way, and in a way which a previous generation of leaders could not be effective in those circumstances.
Thank you so much, Minister. Just for your information, for me, I have two phones, but those phones are made in China because I don't have money to buy the phone from the US. And I think that Chinese phone are good enough, and I mean, with a big space. I also want to have the phone from the US, but I don't have that money. So my question to you, and I remember your prime minister said that every Singaporean probably should have two phones, one phone made in the US and another phone made in China. So in this question, I mean, in ASEAN, we have different capacity and we have different political system. Sometimes we have different economic status. So if you go back to your topic, you say balancing ASEAN, maintaining ASEAN balance or something like that. So if we have different situation, we have different knowledge, we have different condition. So how can we balance ourselves? Because some country may have close relation with China because they need economic support, and some country in ASEAN may have very good relation with the US because they need security protection. So in that case, if we want to balance, maintain the ASEAN balance, what would be your advice on that? Okay, thank you.
Don't misunderstand me, but we should be promiscuous in Southeast Asia. In other words, we have no exclusive relationship. I may be dependent upon you now, but you're not the only partner. I have other partners. See? And never be locked into an exclusive patron-client relationship. I wasn't aware that the Singapore Prime Minister asked Singaporeans to have two phones. But I understand the sentiment that we should not be dependent on any one phone for everything, or any one operating system for everything. And I think Southeast Asians understand this. If you run, say, a coffee shop in Siem Reap, someone says, okay, I'll offer you Khmer currency. Okay. What about US dollar? I take US dollar. Renminbi, I'll take you renminbi. Euro also okay. Singapore dollar, okay, but bigger margin. What about WeChat? Okay. Alipay, okay. Credit card, okay. That should be our approach in Southeast Asia. Business can be done. It's okay. It depends on the margin. Maybe a bit more, a bit less, but I'll do business with you. If we have that mentality of being practical and not wanting to be exclusively locked, I think we are in a good position in a multipolar world. And anybody says no. If you want to use me, you must be exclusive. Then we have to smile and say, well, then very sad, but too bad. We must be prepared to say that. Because if we're not prepared to say that, our arms will be twisted.
Last two questions, please. Yeah. Last.
First of all, I'd like to pay my high respect to Your Excellencies, the former Foreign Minister. My name is Samar Dong. I am from the National University of Management. Recently, President Xi Jinping has visited President Joe Biden in California to discuss about the internal economics issues China is facing and requesting cooperations with the Chinese authority in hunting down illegal substances, as well as to resolve the communication dispute of their military. What does this say of the future relation between the two countries, and will it affect the Asian community in any ways? Thank you.
Well, in the short term, bilateral relations will not get worse. Then that's good news. It may even get a little better. So that's even better news. American corporations are feeling more enthusiastic about China now. In the past, they were the greatest proponents of good bilateral relations. But about 8-9 years ago, they turned against China. Today, they realize that a lot of their business is done in China, and they really do need China. So they are now taking a softer approach towards bilateral relations. But the longer term rivalry between the US and China will continue. So Jake Sullivan, Raimondo, they said, no, on critical things, China is a threat. And if it's a threat with the US strategically, then that outcomes commercial importance. The reason for this is, I think, because the US has enough problems in Europe and in the Middle East, and it's got no bandwidth to take on China additionally. I think there's also a concern by those responsible for the economy that the global economy may take a turn for the worse. And if it takes a turn for the worse, they will need to cooperate with China. In 2008, we had a global financial crisis. The G7 countries could not lift the world out of recession. So George Bush Jr. convened the first G20 summit in Washington. The following year, 2009, Gordon Brown convened the second in London. And at that meeting, China agreed to pump prime and drew up a 4 trillion renminbi budget. China spent and helped to save the world. If the world goes into another economic crisis, the G7 is not big enough. And there's no G20 which is functioning because of the Ukraine war. So US-China relations may become very important at a critical period. If the world economy goes down, Biden will lose. And for many Americans, Trump coming back is unacceptable, but it's becoming increasingly imaginable. And this is part of the problem in the US today. But I believe that these are the considerations why the US, for the time being, doesn't want relations with China to get worse. But I was quite frank when I visited Taiwan. I said, whether there is war with the US, between China and the US over Taiwan, depends on the US. It doesn't depend on Taiwan. If the US doesn't want war, Taiwan can't do anything. In any case, the Taiwanese want war, then the Americans will use you to fight China. And this is now the subject in the presidential elections. To what extent they want to be part of a larger American strategy on China. So China has gained a few years. But I think with each passing year, it is harder and harder for the US to think of defeating China. I think in 10 years' time, it is not realistically possible for the US to think of defeating China. And when that day comes, I think there'll be peace in the region.
And last questions.
Good morning, Excellency. My name is Sir from the Royal School of Administration. First of all, I would like to thank for your presentations. And second, I would like to thank for the opportunity to deliver my last question for you. And I'm very interested in the story that you have told me earlier, told everyone earlier that how Israel, the closest allies with the United States, have the good diplomatic relations with the China. And if we go back into our case, we could see that Cambodia, even though Cambodia have the foreign diplomatic stressing the importance of diversification, which means that Cambodia want to have friends with everyone, but we could see that the closest of our diplomatic relation with China, the less diplomatic ties that the United States want to have with Cambodia. So my question is, I want to see your perspective toward this and your recommendations, how Cambodia and the United States can improve the relations. Thank you.
If the US forces us to choose between the US and China, I think many Southeast Asian countries will give them answers they will not want to hear. Because our economic well-being depends much more on China than the US. If the US doesn't force a choice, the US will be welcome everywhere. And even if they are not knocking on our door, we will open the door and say, please come in. Because we want the US as diversification from China. Every country along the Belt and Road wants the US as diversification if the US doesn't say either me or China. If the US says, well, China has built the road, China is an important partner, are we welcome? Of course you're welcome. And this is not just economically, this is culturally, politically. The US, by taking a step back, will be in a much more stable position. It's like in Kung Fu or Tai Chi, you know. Sometimes you take a step back, you can reach further. But when you are all the time leaning forward, you will fall. So the US, by moving closer to all the other poles, will have tremendous leverage. And only the US can take that position because China cannot take that position, Europe cannot take that position, India cannot take that position. So the best strategy for the US, but it's not for me to tell the US, but the best strategy for the US, in my view, is to take half a step back and be in a more stable position. And if you take half a step back with Cambodia in Southeast Asia, the US will be welcome everywhere.
So thank you so much, Mr. Former Foreign Minister of Singapore. Thank you for your responses to all the questions, and thank you our distinguished participant for your wonderful interaction with our guest speaker. And next, I would like to invite His Excellency Dr. On Kyung for his closing remarks. Thank you, Mr. Foreign Minister.
But at this closing, I just wanted to thank Deputy Prime Minister Sukhinda Sopia for his initiative to invite former Minister George Yao to be here at our ministry. And if I recall correctly, our Deputy Prime Minister said he is a trendsetter. And throughout the interactions with him, we are sure that he certainly is a trendsetter. We begin our discussion with multipolarity and then venture into multiple issues ranging from food all the way to particularly an item that's so essential to Southeast Asia, and that is rice. So all the issues that have been raised here by our guest speaker touches on some of the key issues of the Cambodian government, as well as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. And that is the issue of economic diplomacy, as well as political issue as well. And also would like to thank all participants, particularly our senior ministers, minister, secretary of states, chief cabinets, if I recall, taking time away from their busy schedule to come here. And most impressively, I would like to thank our student participants. I remember talking to David Chandler, which happened to be my advisor as well. He said in the 1990s, it was very difficult to engage in intellectual conversations in Cambodia. But when he came back in the 2000s, he found so many Cambodians, particularly in the younger cohort, who could engage him in intellectual conversations. And that is a sign of progress and is a sign of hope. And as former Minister George Yao said, he saw fundamental differences from his first trip to Cambodia, which the streets full of guns, now to where you can now walk and we walked in Siem Reap. It was peaceful, it was safe. So Cambodia has a saying that to live is to hope. And I think from this event, there's a lot of hope for our country. And once again, thank you so much for your insight and your lively interactions with our participants here. Right. Give him a round of applause.